All right.
Hello,
Hello,
hello.
everyone, and welcome. Um, Welcome to episode one. This here is episode one of COSS Journeys. Commercial open source software is a growing industry, a growing segment of a growing industry, and there's a lot of wisdom to be learned, and there's a lot of people embarking on this journey. Those who have already been doing it for many years, those who are just starting out now, and those who are maybe looking for some inspiration of how they can actually go through and do their own journeys. So, in this series, we'll be interviewing quite a few founders and team members from various cause startups at various stages. And what we want to try and determine and understand is what's the wisdom that they have to pass on, and how can we as non-cause people, how can we get into cause and start our own commercial open source software business, and how can we take things to another level. So episode one is very interesting because I have somebody very cool with me, and we have with us James Perkins from Unkey.dev. Before we get into that, my name is Omar McAdam. I'm the founder of Uninbox. And you're going to be saying, hold on a second, didn't you just say, if I don't press the wrong button, didn't you just say Unkey? Yes, Unkey and Uninbox, believe it or not, both domains, both organizations founded within 24 hours of each other, completely separately on different parts of the world. So, and I should actually put the name tags up there. So, James, hello, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on the first episode. That's always nice to be the first one to lead out the charge. Uh, being a live streamer and YouTuber kind of makes it easy to be the first because you know what's coming.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping, somebody who maybe also does a bit of streaming or also does a bit of video content, just to make sure, just to kind of alleviate a little bit of the stress that I may end up having. I have streamed a lot in the past. I've done a lot of video related stuff in the past. But starting off a new series or starting off something in a new format is always a little bit kind of, you get a little bit kind of anxious for that. So I'm very thankful to have you here. And yeah, it's very, very interesting that 24 hours apart. And I looked up like the domain registrations. That's how I kind of knew it was 24 hours apart. But 24 hours apart, you guys registered, and I say you guys, will come to your co-founder in a second. You guys registered Unkey.dev, and I registered on inbox.com. Initially, it wasn't .com. I didn't have the .com. But before we dive into Unkey, and before we dive into the world of uns, let's hear a little bit more about yourself. So you said that you do some streaming, you've done some video content. So what's your background as a developer, and what's your background as someone who's out there creating things?
Yeah, sure. So I've been around in the industry for about 15 years. I've worked in most industries, sort of wide berths, and a lot of different stages. Some, pre-seed, some seed, all the way up to like Fortune 100s. And I worked in a lot of different industries as a software developer. So things like I was in the US car registration for a while. So if you like went and bought a car in say Pennsylvania, you could get the plates the same day. That was all software that I was a part of, and same across many states, California, North Carolina, etc., etc. I worked on gambling machines and the lottery in the United States and across the globe. And then I've done a bunch of other stuff. I've worked for Plaid, the startup for fintechs. I've worked at Tina, did CMS work. I've worked at Clerk for authentication. So I've done a lot of stuff over my 15 years. And then, yeah, on content creation, that all started when COVID was, what else are you going to do? You got nothing else to do at home, can't leave the house. Used to be, I went to college originally to be a teacher. So kind of just fell into like, well, I can teach devs about stuff that I've learned.
Okay,
And then
interesting.
that content kind of took off, and it did pretty well in the beginning. And then like now I'm just about to hit 15K subs, and I get to make videos every week about cool stuff that I see, whether it's like actual tutorials or like highlighting open source software or closed source software. And yeah, so that's kind of me, and now Unkey full time.
Okay. So you've got 15 years of development experience, and by the sounds of it, you've worked in some crazy places that and industries that bring their own unique challenges. Like they
Hmm.
bring they have it's everything is a custom solution, and everything has to be done
Hmm.
according to the book, and everything has to be kind of quite secretive. Not
Yes.
quite so secretive, but there's a lot of rules around who can do what, why, when, where, how. So
Yep.
that kind of brings up the topic of open source, and open source is kind of almost the complete opposite of that. If you're working in governmental or high industry or blue chip, as I said, that there's a lot of security around the code. But then open source is, yeah, you can have security around the code, but it's all open. So how was
Hmm.
that? Like, what was your transition into the world of open source?
Yeah, so I dabbled for a while in open source, just doing some small like npm packages when that was kind of all the rage, which is like, oh, you could do like an npm package that did a bunch of regex, for example, and like publish that, and people would use it. So I went through a stage of that, but really, what really kicked it off for me is probably when I worked at Tina CMS, because their entire stack is
Okay.
completely open source. So you
Okay.
could basically take everything, and it was open source. And when I started working there, the sort of love for open source sort of returned. So in a way that I was like, wow, it would be cool if like every job I work from now on has some sort of open source library or some way to produce open source code. And when I was at Tina, obviously everything was open source. When I worked at Clerk, all the SDKs and libraries were open source. And then like my last foray at Clerk was open sourcing the documentation. So that before that was all closed source. So the only way you could ever get a doc updated was you had to rely on engineers. My last
Okay.
foray was open sourcing that, allowing the community who know your product just as well as probably everybody in the entire company does, if not more, because they use it daily, could go in and update that stuff. And then obviously with Unkey, as soon as we started the project, the immediate thing was like, let's make this completely open source. I don't want any part of this to be closed off. If people want to use it and self-host it, let's go for it. If they want to help us, let's go for it. Like, let's just make this as easy as possible for anybody to get started. And
Cool.
Andreas was already in the same mindset beforehand, so it was a really easy uh,
So
sell for
we've touched
everyone.
very nicely, and it's a good segue into your co-founder because
Hmm.
your co-founder
Yeah.
is somebody who is very well known,
Hmm.
an instantly recognizable name,
Hmm.
but also very unknown, and nobody
Hmm.
would know his face or his voice
Pretty
or
much.
anything.
Yep.
So your co-founder is Chronarch.
Yep.
If I find the right window, well, I don't have it open now, but we'll touch on it a little bit later on. So Chronarch Andreas has created a lot of really cool projects and tools over the years.
Hmm.
How did you two meet to work on Anki? Was it just a random, spontaneous kind of spur of the moment, a tweet, a chat message? Did you in fact, who reached out to who initially?
Yeah. So Andreas and I know each other from when I worked at Clerk. So he put Clerk in. I think it was Planetfall. So when he was working on Planetfall, he wanted Clerk for authentication versus like rolling his own or doing next auth, whatever. And it was still a little rough around the edges. So he joined the Discord and we got chatting, and you know we sort of hit it off, and we kind of kept in contact for a while. And then I did some contract work for Upstash. So I was doing some advisory work for them, which then meant that Andreas and I were in contact even more. Um, and Andreas hit me up one day and was talking about this project that he was thinking about building, and it it was Unkey at the time, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm really thinking about doing this like API authentication." Um, in the Slack channel that we had for Upstash, more as like a, hey, it would be cool if like maybe Clerk could sponsor it, or something like that, just to like help out,
Mm.
right? And I was like, we should talk. Let's go to, how about on Discord, like where we would chat. And he was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then he like pitched the idea to me, and then immediately I was like, I'm in. What do you want to do? How do you want to do this? Let's get this like going, because I think what we have, based upon your like initial idea, could be really really big. Um, and then we just, that was it. Started the same day we were building out the landing page, buying the
Okay.
domain.
That's a pretty cool story. I've heard a lot from people who they have an idea or they've seen a pain point and they've
Hmm.
accepted it in the past, like you're building out an API. It's not your first API you're building out. You put in your systems, you put in your limits, etc. But then you've
Hmm.
implemented
Hmm.
it once, twice, thrice, and every time you end up thinking, why am I spending so much time on this? And so it's very interesting to hear how you two essentially, I mean, you reached out to each other, or you reached out in the existing channels, and I think you both, from what I'm hearing, you've both kind of said, yeah, this is a pain I've had before, and this would be something that fixes a real problem. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. That's exactly it. Like the pain point that we see now today is the same kind of pain point you saw with front end auth, say like 5 years ago, where you
yeah,
had like one or two options. It was like auth zero, or you rolled your own, or you used the third party library. Those were kind of your like options. And in the last
yeah.
5 years, now you've got 10, 15 different options. Some are open source, some are not, some are popular, some are not, but like there are plenty of options out there. And we see the
Yeah, you
same
got
problem,
something
which
for
is
everyone now.
right, right.
If you're willing to do a lot of work, roll your own with
Hmm.
whatever libraries that can do a lot of the backend functions. If you
Yep,
want to reduce the amount of work that you want, but you still want a lot of flexibility, there's stuff in between that will handle the heavy lifting, and you just put a skin on it. And then there's other solutions where you literally just put in your key and tell it where to put the elements, and it just goes and does everything. But
exactly.
yeah, the landscapes have been changing quite a lot recently, and I think that I don't have a long-term development background, but I've been in the development world, i.e., working with developers, working on projects that involve developers for many years. And I feel that the landscape recently has started to become a lot more accepting or a lot more
Hmm.
open to these packages or services that provide a solution. It's like they're going to cut out the headache that you have to deal with. They're going to cut out a lot of the pain. And I don't know why this system keeps giving me thumbs ups. Apparently, the system likes it. Maybe somebody online is liking it somewhere. Those of you who are watching live, feel free to ask any questions you have in the chats of the respective platforms, and we'll talk about them here. But yeah, there's a whole new wave of services coming up that solve these developer challenges, these developer things, the things that you used to previously have to go and build your own auth, or previously go and build your own API key system, or go and build your own email system, as an example. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting space, and especially with COSS, commercial open source software, I think that's really opened up the floodgates for, maybe not the floodgates, but it's opened up the path for developers to create a useful tool and end up turning it into an actual business, a viable business that you can use to live off, or do whatever you need to do. Which brings us to an interesting question of, is this your first business? Is this the first time you've launched such a project? Or I don't know about Andreas or Cronarch. Do either of you have previous business experience, or is this your first go and you're kind of going through it right now?
Yeah, so I've done businesses in the past, but they've always been in the consultant space. So I've always been a consultant of some variant, whether it's a dev consultant or DevRel, dev advocacy. I've done a lot of consulting work, but I've never done something to the level that we're doing with Unkey. Unkey is, you know, incorporated. we have shares, all that kind of stuff is there. Like we are fully vested in Unkey, and this is the first time we're really going through the whole founder, CEO, CTO, all that fun stuff that comes with being, in this industry, in the space. So yeah, this is our first real time of both of us doing it to this level.
And how has that been so far? I mean, I guess you hear a
Uh,
lot of different stories and a lot of like wildly different advice. You know,
mhm.
people are like, "No, you have to do this. No, you have to incorporate with Stripe. No, you have to do one, two, three." How has that been for you guys? Like, have you found the information that you need? Have you found do you know the necessary steps, or have you been seeking advice from people, or how was that process for you as a first timer?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of A and a little bit of B. So knowing people in the industry already, like I know founders that are a spectrum of like either YC or VC or a mix of both, right? So I've been kind of in this space knowing some founders. So when we first thought about getting serious about it, I reached out to a few of them and said, like, what's your advice? Like, if you were gonna take this to viability and make it your own business and full time, and you know potentially raise money, blah blah blah, like, what would you do today versus what you did when you started? And the same kind of things always came up, which was like get incorporated as fast as possible, because if you go and seek money, it could be weeks and you could be done. Like if your business is that good, if people really really like what you're doing, VCs will. The problem is not raising the money; it's deciding who to raise the money from. Right. So that was kind of our advice from some people. Other people gave us advice of like, hey, like, Glauber, for example, from Terso, which he's been through like a bunch of different things where it was originally Chisel Strike and now it's Terso, and so he gave advice of like, hey, like I'll happily give you advice on who to talk to, who in the industry is worth reaching out to. He did some intros for us. Like it's been a really good experience, and I think that's what's different than say like 5-6 years ago, where it's very cutthroat, where it was just like everybody's out for themselves. I got to like make my money. I got to get my seed money, and there wasn't as much like cross conversation. But I think now that industry has changed a lot and realized that like there's space for everybody here. So the next person that comes up and is talking about raising money, I would give them similar advice. That'd be like, hey, like here are my top 3 things that I would have done in the beginning. And yeah, that definitely worked. Although your camera's gone now.
Yep, my camera has gone. It will it will return
It,
momentarily.
it will come back. There will be a face there.
Yep, there we go. I am officially now known as. There we go. No signal. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Again, small little teething problems.
Indeed.
Great. So you got a lot of cool advice, and obviously a big part of what you guys had to do over the last few weeks is, and just for clarity, you guys, I think it was the 9th of June that you first registered. And
Yep.
now we are looking at the 25th of September. So for future time reference, that's the time difference. We're talking about 3 and a bit months.
Yep.
So in that time, you had to decipher a lot of the advice, choose the things that you're going to do, work out the steps, but at the same time, go and build the product.
Yep.
Like you didn't go and spend every hour just working on business stuff. How was it for you balancing those two aspects of working on the business and working on the product? I mean, you have a co-founder. Did you end up splitting responsibilities? Did you both end up working on both things together? How was that journey for you?
Yeah, so the journey kind of worked in a way that it was actually very good. So if you don't know Andreas at all, he lives in Germany. And I live in America right now. So the good part about that is our time zones are split in a way that he basically finishes work sort of mid-morning my time at his full-time job, and I would work late during the night, till like 9, 10, 11 o'clock. We split a lot. So technically I did a lot of the business stuff just out of like pure like, yep, I can take care of this. Um and also marketing and change logs and like deciphering how to like publish new stuff and encourage people to come in. So all the marketing stuff is just natural to me.
Yep.
Being in the YouTube space and being, you know, fairly popular on Twitter and everything else. So I took that on. And then Andreas is so technical that like he is there's a reason he's built very good products before because he's so good technically. Um, so he basically fell into the role of like deciphering how we're going to do some of the work, and he would either implement that work or like that work would then get split between us. Um, and it kind of worked out that, you know, I would try and do 50-50 on the business and the marketing and the business marketing and coding 50-50 as much as I could. And Andreas would spend most of his time worried about the core code and the direction of the company. And that worked out really well for us. Like you know, we've never really had an issue where, you know, we've not had enough time to do one or the other. There's always been enough time in our part-time lives to get that done before, you know, I went full-time.
Perfect. Cool. So we've spoken quite a bit now about the product. We've dropped a few hints. There's obviously people who are watching or listening who have never heard of Unkey, who don't know about Unkey. So I'm not necessarily a fan of elevator pitches, just because I know they're a bit cheesy, but what problem does Unkey solve?
Yeah, so the whole point of Unkey is to allow developers to essentially secure, manage, and scale an API. So imagine you are, you know, you've got the latest AI product and you have an API that you want your users to interact with, however that may be, whether it's directly or through your app or whatever. What we do is allow you to give you globally distributed keys. And the idea here is that you can just give somebody a key. You can set a rate limit on it or limited use, or it can expire in a week. And we give you key and API analytics, so per key or the entire API. So the idea here is that you don't have to worry about all of those pieces that you end up building anyway, but you end up building them in silo, right? So what usually happens is you build an API and then you're like, I need API keys because how am I going to know who is interacting with this API? So you build that part. Then you're like, oh, I didn't think about like globally distributing it. So
All right, let's see. Yeah, welcome back. I have no idea what happened there.
it just kicked me straight out. It just said, thanks for joining. And I was like, okay, cool. Thanks for having me.
Sorry, everyone who's watching or listening. I seem to have had a bit of a system malfunction. Just trying to get back to where we were. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, I think we're back. I mean, it looks like everything says that we're back streaming.
Cool.
Yeah, Twitch is still happy. YouTube, I think, is still happy. So yeah, let's keep going, and we can always stitch together the recording.
Yeah. No worries.
We'll have to check the recording, but yeah, we can stitch things together at the end.
So what did you hear?
I heard a lot. It was just literally the last 20 seconds.
All right.
So you mentioned a couple of things that are actually very interesting to me. So you mentioned that you mentioned the analytics, and you mentioned kind of the temporary keys and the per key rate limiting. So obviously when you're building out a system, if you're going to have developer access, hopefully most people, probably not the people who don't hash passwords in the database, but most people will put in some kind of rate limit into their API. So far, you guys with the analytics, I assume that's for the purpose of the business. Is that developer-focused analytics, i.e. your system can go in and like
right? Yeah. So right now it's just Yeah, right now, so our system provides you with basically the business decisions around what's happening. So per key, for example, will show you how many times the key's been used in, let's say, the last 30 days. Um, how many of those have been rate limited? How many of those have been successful? All those things that allow you to decide, is this person a heavy user, a light user? Should I be reaching out to this user and being like, hey, I see that you're using a lot of our API. Like, we'd love to strike up maybe an enterprise deal with you or a business plus deal where, um, something like that happens. So it's
Okay.
definitely business decisions right now. And in the future, as we build out the product, we will be able to do some more where we could tell you, what's potentially, some more data driven stuff that you could use to decide as a developer.
Yeah, so that's super valuable. I come from a bit more of a product background, and
Hmm.
being able to, even just knowing that the analytics are being captured and later on being able to use them is super valuable. Because as you mentioned, like you can drive a lot of business decisions based on previous data of usage. I mean,
Hmm.
if Twitter had API analytics running, they maybe would have come out with a better API plan than their $42,000 a month plan. But it seems like, I mean, obviously they are a massive organization, and the storage of that data for them would have probably been in the millions of dollars a year. But another interesting thing that you have is kind of per key rate limiting.
Yep.
So from my understanding, I can essentially, and we'll dive into a demo in a little bit, but I can essentially say, hey, create me a new API key with XYZ limit, or is it XYZ category or XYZ like bucket
Yep.
type system,
Yes.
and create another one with something else?
Yeah. So the idea is that every key is individualized. So for your rate limiting, you can set, the burst limit, how many you're going to refresh, and what the refresh time is. So,
Mm-hmm.
and each key can do that. So you could set it, like 100 on my burst, and we refresh 10 every 10 seconds or something like that on each key. And then the next key could have, 1,000 and 100. And then again, on top of that, you can mix and match. So if you prefer, you need per key rate limiting. So you want to really make sure that like someone's not abusing the API, but you also
Mm-hmm.
give them, let's say, a limited amount of uses. So maybe you give them 10,000 uses, but they also have a rate limit. You can do that as well. So you can like essentially turn a key into any kind of key that you may need for your business needs. So like AI is always a good example because like the amount of abuse that comes through AI is pretty heavy. So you could set like, okay, everyone that spends $10 gets 1,000 uses, but they can only use 10 API calls a minute because it costs me a lot of money to do all those processes in the background. And you could set that, and then the user would get 1,000 uses, but also 10 every minute or something like that.
Cool. Yeah, so the product definitely, I like how the product has taken something that would otherwise be very mundane or otherwise be
Hmm.
very annoying and boring to implement. You know, when you think about,
Yes.
oh, I'm going to have to throw up a Redis instance, and then I'm going to have to do this, I'm going to have to invalidate keys, I'm going to have to generate
Hmm.
keys, how am I going to track who's using which key, etc., got a good database, etc. So it's taken something very mundane and very for certain cases can be complicated, not necessarily to build, but to maintain and grow out of. And you guys have created a product around that. You've created a service, Unkey.dev. And with that service, developers can remove a whole bunch of the headache and pains that they have, but you've smartly also integrated the business side of things. Because at the
Hmm.
end of the day, there's always going to need to be business decisions. And so you've already started to look at implementing some of the business side of things to appeal to not just the developers or the buyers, as it would be, or the users, sorry, consumers, users, whoever, the people implementing the system, but also giving them something extra for for the rest of the product, for the rest of the team, for the rest of the organization. So that's a very, very interesting approach. I want to talk a little bit about, like, was it always your plan to come out with these types of things, like temporary keys, per key limits, business analytics, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff you guys want to do later on. Maybe we can touch on those a little bit. But what was your kind of initial thought, and what did you realize, or what came afterwards that you thought, okay, we really need to add this in. This is definitely a pain point.
Yeah, so the original like prod first go, which was released, 2 weeks, I think. It was like 2 weeks after we did our first commit. We had per key rate limiting, and we also had temporary keys. Those were the two big things that we had. We did have analytics, but they weren't driven quite to the level that they are now. They worked, but they're definitely not what we have in production today, and I'll definitely show how those kind of work. The limited keys was an addition thing that I had thought about, and I think Andreas had touched on a bit, which was like looking in our space today, AI. Well, and I'll just keep bringing it up. People are going to get bored of listening, but AI is so popular today that
it's the biggest use case right now. Like, it's so easy to apply it. It's
right. It's just easy to explain. But like, if you look at AI today, if you want to provide a service that has like a token-based system to it, then you have to go and do that yourself. However you do it, right? So like maybe you use your front end auth and you just give them like metadata, and attach to that metadata is each token, and every time someone uses it, you have to update that metadata, and then you have to build in this process, right? And then similarly, or you could build it in Redis, or you could build it in somewhere. But the problem with that is that you still have to implement all of that code. You can't just and then you have to make sure that code doesn't like get abused, or someone figures out how to get around your rate limiting or your per key tokens. So I was like, it would be really cool if we could just come out with a system where you say, give me 1,000 tokens. And then like once it's 1,000 tokens, the only way that you can then use that key ever again is either using our update functionality. So you can update the key and give them more tokens, or that key will never be able to be used again. And that was kind of our idea, was that like, that's a really good use case. And we've seen people in the AI space start to use that as their use case. Like, yeah, I need tokens. Great. They already have that, and it's globally distributed, and I don't have to worry about where they live. Cool. Okay, let me build that out. And then like, it's like, use an SDK or use the API directly, and you're done. Like, there's no extra implementation. It's just look to see if it's been verified. If it doesn't verify, then just tell them no.
Okay. So it sounds like, I think you guys still have quite a few things in terms of features that you've got up your sleeve.
Definitely.
And from this conversation, I can tell there's going to be some real wild ones. Like,
yep.
I'm a very big fan of things that just make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Things that maybe at the first glance a lot of people wouldn't be so, yeah, that's obvious. But once you've seen it and you've played with it and you've touched it and you've tasted it, you're like, my God, pizza is the best food in the world. And for those of you who are wondering about the pizza reference, that's simply I am known as McPizza. But how have you worked with? I mean, it's an open source project. You don't say outright on the website open source. I think on the landing page.
We do now. We do now. We have it on the landing page now.
Okay.
We didn't until this weekend, because I think the original landing page had. So if you scroll, if you scroll all the way to the top, it should. Yeah, it says like it's very hinted at in the like the blurb there. It just says like Unkey is an open source API management platform. But like, yeah, we didn't do the classic open source, which is like that's the first thing we read.
We are open source. That's
we're
what we
open
are.
Source, right?
Yeah.
And the only reason we actually put it here was because we realized that maybe people didn't realize we were open source anymore, and thought maybe we were a closed source platform. So we decided to make this change to the hero to include that.
Okay.
But yeah,
how has it gone with the community? Like going open source, obviously your code is all visible on GitHub, and you guys also have a Discord server, which I kind of sit in there sometimes just silently. I'm one of those like lurkers. I just go in randomly and check out the cool messages and stuff. But how has that worked with with your business so far, as a business, kind of as a new business, as an open source business, how have you worked with the community? Like, what is the part of it? Like how? Let me try and phrase this in a good way. You being an open source business, with everything being visible, you always end up with two separate kinds of users. You end up with the very technical people who are analyzing the code and creating issues or feedback or questions specifically around the code. But then you have the users of the product who come in and do their own stuff. And maybe for you guys it's a bit different. You're a development tool, so the developers most likely have a GitHub. But how has it worked spreading things between your GitHub and your Discord server? And have you noticed a split or some difference in the users and the kind of requests and stuff that they come with? And how do you handle that? So make it
Yeah,
5 questions or something.
yeah, it's 5 questions. I'll answer them all. So being open source and being a dev tool makes the type of clients or type of users very easy to manage, right? So 90% of the use cases that we have are developers that need, right? They just need this for their next dev tool or whatever it might be. So for us, that makes it really easy. In our Discord, we have a lot of community members that are willing to help out, whether they want to build SDKs or whatever in their preferred language. And then we have other users that just like they found us on Google and then immediately they, sign up for an account. They don't know or they don't care that we're open source. They use us as a SaaS. And if they need support, they have two options. They either go through Discord or they use like support at Unkey.dev, which then comes, through our support tool that we have, which is plain. And we can respond to those. And it's been really good, to be honest. Like people that open issues are usually very technical and they give us good issues to work off of. People that come in the Discord, fairly similar. It's like, hey, I need help. This is what's happening. It's weird. Like I don't understand. And usually we can, oh, yep, that's our problem. Or oops, yeah, we deployed something and it's broken. And then the rest is just, it's been delightful, to be honest. It's probably been less stressful than most people would imagine. Because with open source, there's always that stigma of like, oh, it's open source and like people are mean, right? Like they open issues and they're mean to you, whatever. And that is the case for a lot of places, especially when it's like core critical to your app. But our community so far has been really good, and being commercial makes it really easy. Because we're commercial, it allows us to really have that argument of like, well, we got to fix this because there's people relying on us. It's less like like an npm package or something like that, where if you are open source, like it's less commercialized than an actual product like we have today.
Okay. And obviously, I mean, I've been watching your docs evolve over time. And I mean, they're pretty great at kind of explaining everything and going through things. And being a fly on the wall in your Discord server, I have noticed that the quality of kind of questions has gone from very basic, like almost like, hey, how do I make a function? I mean, it's not quite that bad, but like it started, the gaps have been filled. So with your documentation, I guess as well with some of the videos that you guys have, or you have done more so, and some of the things in the Discord community, what priority did you attach to creating the docs from early on? And is there anything that you would have changed in terms of creating this knowledge around Unkey and how to share that knowledge with the users? Would you have changed anything from the beginning, or is there something that you plan to change?
So to docs were like basically in the beginning it was we don't ship unless there's a doc.
Very interesting.
I have a very firm belief, and is that if you ship something with a doc, it's not shipped. Because like, how is someone supposed to know how to use it if they can't? If there's no documentation, like how do you use this, right? And that's very hard when you're moving incredibly fast. It's incredibly difficult to be very like, nope, sorry, you can't ship that until the doc is done. Um,
Hmm.
and we've let it slide a little bit recently, and that's mostly because two part-time people trying to ship features, trying to ship improvements, and try and write docs, and try and do it takes up a lot of time.
Yeah.
Um, and we've been lucky. Some of our community members have been like, "Hey, by the way, like, I found this in the doc, so like, I did a PR because it's just MDX, which for us is great." Um, but yeah, in the future, when we start to really to ramp up and maybe we get employees or whatever, like that will be something that's core, which is like this feature is not a feature until it has documentation, because DX is like our number one priority, which for people that don't know, maybe you don't know what the phrase means, but it's just developer experience, right? And you only get to make one first impression for DX, and then your
Hmm.
DX grows as you use the product, right? So if your docs suck or they're out of date or they're hard to understand, you're more likely to lose a dev than if your docs are really good, but like maybe there's some rough edges. That you can then they can then come to you and be like, hey, like been really rough around this part. Like how am I doing it wrong or whatever, or is like something up? It's much easier to coax something like that than it is to be like, oh, your complete quick start guide is out of date, or you know,
Yep.
your entire reference is out of date. Because it's all API first, it needs to be up to date all the time. Because if the response doesn't match what's in your docs, it's very hard to argue that fact and be like, oops, yeah, we forgot or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, it's. I think it's definitely apparent. I've used a lot of developer tools over the last year or so that I've landed and essentially been lost.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll go to the repo, for example, and it will just have npmi, npm run, whatever, and that's it.
Done. Yep.
Done. And that's your documentation, and the rest of it is essentially then you're left debugging things. So I have seen that Unkey has maintained, I would say, very very good docs. I haven't gone too deep into it, but I remember seeing kind of from very early on. Is there something that you wish you'd done differently with relation to the docs or the community? Or is there something that you maybe feel you've seen somebody else doing and you've gone, that's actually something maybe we will implement or we want to do? I mean, I know you create videos. I've seen one or two videos out right now about Unkey. I think you maybe do another update video,
Yep.
probably a little bit soon, just to cover some of the new features. But what would you do different, or what do you plan to improve upon in your current systems?
Yeah, so there's just a few like small things I think, which is like making sure um, that our docs are really clear. Sometimes it gets lost in the dev, right? So like as a
Mm,
developer, it's very hard sometimes to have the mind frame of you've never seen Unkey ever in your entire life, right? That's how every doc should be written. Is like you've never seen this before, so like it gets very hard to do that. I think a few things that would really that will implement soon will be some more guides, because we don't really have any guides. We have like a quick cut start guide, and then it's like you're on your own. Like
yeah.
here's how to get started, and then like use the API. I think we're gonna start to push. You'll see whether they end up in the docs or whether they end up in our blog. It's like how to get started with Unkey and maybe your auth provider. Like how did those two things work together? Or similar things like that where users need to know that because it's an important feature, but maybe we don't touch on it enough. Um, and then really outside of that, like the community side of things, I think we're doing fantastic, which is like we encourage you as a community member to contribute however you like. Whether that's giving us feedback and saying like, "Hey, it would be cool if you had this feature," whether that's like, "Hey, I built an SDK in Rust and like, what do I do now?
Mm,
Like, how do I get it included in the documentation?" Um, and just things like that. Like, we've really done that since the beginning of time because we both know that there are two types of people potentially that could see Unkey, right? Like we had an explosion when we first started. We went from like 0 to like 700 stars in like 2 weeks, and it was like big, and you know that dies off as time goes on because you know keeping Unkey in people's minds is hard. But people that have never done any open source work before may be interested because like, oh, this is a really neat product. I've never seen this before, but like, how do I get started? Um, and so we've always encouraged that from the beginning, and we did have a little hit and miss where our contribution guide was terrible, and we knew that it was, so we had to like basically people came in our Discord and be like, how do I contribute? And you'd have to like give them the guide like in a Discord message and send it to them. And we've improved that now, but just if you ever build any open source project, encouraging the community in any way, I think, is the lifeblood of the product. And I think it makes people want to either try you or maybe just get invested in the company. And we see that in our community members. We have 2 or 3 like really invested community members who happily spend their free time either building their own SDKs, updating their own SDKs, helping with the docs, you know, having a chat with us, encouraging us, like all those things that you need when you first start a business that you might not get from, I don't know, family or friends or whoever who maybe don't believe that, you know, this is the next million or billion-dollar idea, which you know, in some cases is hard.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I've been hearing a lot from a lot of COSS founders that the community ends up being. So trying to think of a good analogy here, but essentially almost like a perpetual motion machine or a
Mm-hmm.
perpetual acceleration machine. Let's call it that, a perpetual acceleration machine. In that the more that they engage with and the more that they give the community and the more that they make the community's life easier and clearer, the more the community starts to feed back into the project. And we've seen recently a lot of commercial open source startups move their communities from Slack to Discord because Discord has a lot of great features built in. There's the threads, there's the posts, there's the forum style stuff, there's the long history, etc. And by building up a very strong community, it's actually allowed them to A, move a lot faster, but B, build a deeper and better solution to the problems. Because me as a user on my side of the world with my code, with my systems and my industries, I may have one type of demand or issue more than another. And you may have something that I've never even come across and never even heard of. And so with the community, they've been building the more comprehensive solutions, hitting the, you know, a larger amount of pain points than just the one thing. And that's been very interesting to hear is, you know, the sense of the community. And talking about that now, how have you guys been with this journey of commercial open source software? Like, it's having your own community for your product is great, but for you guys as well, you mentioned early on that you have various people in your network that are either founders or they're you know, startup people, or they've worked in you know, Series A, Series B, early, late stage, etc. But from the commercial open source software side of things, how have you guys? And I'm trying to keep my eye on the clock right now in the corner there, because we do want to get to a quick demo at the end. But how have you guys been kind of learning and absorbing the stuff around the open source? Are you building this just as a traditional business, or are there other open source companies that you're kind of looking at and following and learning from and taking lessons from? And I guess
Yeah, and
that's like the open source side of the community in a sense.
yeah, and I think you'd be silly not to. Like there are industry gold standards, right? So if you're in commercial open source, you know that like cal.com is like the gold star. What they do, you know, Pierre and everybody over there, what they do is like the gold standard for anybody that wants to do commercial open source. They talk about how to build a community and how to encourage people and everything else that comes along with that. So we've definitely done a lot of like things based around things we may have seen cal.com. I mean, like recently, you know, writing up a few pieces of docs that are internal docs, but like for us, like I went and looked to see what Cal was doing and say, okay, like this is what they're doing there. So like, how can we do it here and maybe just tailor it to more what we need versus what they have? Um, And that's worked really well. And just talking to open source founders is an experience, right? So like maybe there's someone that has maybe they have more GitHub stars, maybe they have more adoption, maybe they have more revenue coming in, right? But they haven't done like they haven't spoken to a single VC,
Yeah.
like zero. And they're like, how does that work? And then it's like that conversation of like, okay, well, the first thing you want to do is either have somebody who knows somebody give you like an intro, and once you get one, then they all start to kind of trickle in. Or maybe it's the conversation around like, well, I've been doing this solo for the past year, but now maybe a co-founder, like how did you find your co-founder? Like those kinds of conversations come up. Like we've seen that in the community, which is like co-founder or solo. And it's like, well, if you want to move quickly and you want the best of both worlds, find a co-founder that has the same goals and ideas as you do. And I think, you know, the open source nature doesn't stop at code, right? It doesn't stop at the repo. It stops at the entire product and the entire business and the entire like goal, essentially a mission of the company. So like for us, if someone came to us and said like, hey, like congratulations on doing so well, like love to pick your brain on a bunch of stuff, we're not just going to be like, no, sorry, like we don't have time for you, because that would just defeat the whole purpose of being so open about everything. Like you can see how many people visit our site, you can see everything basically about what Unkey is doing. So why wouldn't we share that with somebody else? And like we encourage people to reach out to us and be like, hey, I'd love to chat about X or Y, and we'll happily talk for as long as you want to listen to us about these things. And I think if you're in this space and you don't do that and you don't sort of go with the founders in the community, you're missing out on like 50% of what you could be doing.
Okay. Very, very insightful. I appreciate that. I think it's always difficult to do something where there's not so many examples and kind of advice out there about it. And commercial open source software is definitely one of those things where, yeah, there's been companies since the 80s that are technically commercial open source software. But when you look at them, they are multi-billion-dollar companies, or they died many years ago, and they are on a different level in a different industry, and they started up at a very different time. They started up when the world was a different place. And so for the modern world and for now, how would one go about and do that? And I think that's where you touched on a very valuable point of like, there's been a lot of people entering into this recently over the last few years. Cal.com is definitely one of them. And they've essentially been sharing everything along the way. It's not creating a path for other people to follow, but it's like, hey, when we came to this random tree, we picked the fruit and it tasted okay. If you see this fruit, eat it. If you don't see the fruit, just keep going. You know, it's like you're not following in the exact footsteps, but rather you've got a bit of a how-to guide on how to tackle the jungle, in a sense. So yeah, that's part of the reason why I decided to start this series. And you guys are definitely episode 1. To essentially document this. And I hope that in a few months' time, we can have another chat and we can look at what's happened over the last few months and update the journey and update the information, update the things for people. But yeah, I want to jump into a demo. So if absolutely. You can share your screen, just because I think it died last time with the
it did
with the stream restart. But yeah, perfect. Oops, let's put that onto there. And then I should be able to go to...
There we go.
There perfect. We go, cool. So give us a quick demo. And then, yeah, we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so just as a kind of preface to this is that Unkey is technically API first, but that's a boring demo. So let's just do it through the UI and we can talk about how that all kind of works. So when you first sign up for an account, we'll take you through basically an onboarding experience that shows you like each individual piece of Unkey, which I can show you right now. So basically the first thing you do is, let me just make this a little bigger. There we go. First thing you do is create a workspace. Now, the workspace is essentially a way for you to hold all of your different APIs. So maybe you've got a prod, a dev, Maybe you've got, different levels depending on who they are, or maybe they're different API paths. So we'll just give this a workspace name of COSS demo. And then, you get one for free by default. Obviously, I already have one, but then you can use the pro tier if you've got a whole team or you need unlimited resources. Once you create your workspace here, you create an API name. So we can just say like COSS API. And this API essentially just...
Would the API, would that be like production dev?
Yeah.
Else,
so you could do something like, so you could just do something like prod, for example. And this just holds all of your API keys together. So it's just a way for you to group them. Like a user's not going to see this, but maybe for you, it's easier if you call it prod or dev or whatever. And once you create this API, the next step is to create essentially a root key. Now, these root keys are essentially ways for you to create resources. So if you want to create a key, for example, that you want to give to your users, you need a root key to be able to do that. So we'll allow you to create one from the get-go. So here is a root key. And we give you this way to essentially create a key for your users. Now, once you click away from this screen, we will never show you this key again.
Get the key. Yep.
And it works the same way for when you create a key as well. So if I copy this and I see if I can find a new terminal window here, and we just kind of bump this up, maybe get bigger. So if I send this request along now and I hit enter, I'll get a key and a key ID back. Now, this key will never be shown again. So it's the same idea, but this key ID could be shown somewhere else. So let's just copy this for now so that we can hold on to it. And then you can just select, I have created a key. So you can continue to use this root key as many times as you want to create as many resources as you want. And so when I click, I have created a key, we're going to give you this new curl command here. And this curl command essentially allows you to verify this key against something. So if I take this curl command here and drop it in, and we put this key that happens to be still in my terminal and drop it in, you get this response back. And you see how fast that was? It was almost instant. It's like I pressed enter and it was already here because we've cached and pre-warmed all of your keys. So it doesn't matter if you're in the US or Europe or wherever, it'll be just as fast. And you can see that valid is true. So that means that they could access whatever resource that you wanted. But that's only some of it, right? So that's only gives you a small piece of Unkey. So inside of our dashboard here, you can now see that we have this API here in our workspace that's called COSS demo. If we click in here, you can now see that we have some analytics here. And each analytic has how many keys, how many of keys have been active in the last 30 days, how many successful verifications you've had in the last 30 days. And then you can actually see this on your API. So for example, we've had one successful verification, and that was today. But if you go into the key itself, which is right here, and as you can see, it's hidden. If we go and actually do details here, we now get this key and its details around this specific key. So now I can see the IP that it come from, what region I hit, is it valid, what time it was, and how that person essentially hit our API. So we give you all of these details that you can then dig into and decide how you want to deal with that.
I did notice something there.
Yes.
You can revoke keys.
Yes. So
that can be done also over the API or, of course, through the interface here, right? Okay.
Yep. So there's two ways. Everything you can pretty much do in the API, you can do in the UI. That's the whole idea. But you can also do that right through the API if you want to revoke it. So if I go back to sort of our API here, and I go to my keys, and I click here, I can revoke this key. It's going to say, this can't be undone. As soon as it's done, like this user can't access anything anymore. So if I delete this permanently, the key has now been deleted, and we can no longer use that key.
Because Microsoft had quite a nice leak recently.
Yes.
When they shared some docs, and then they couldn't revoke the key.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which is very interesting. So yeah, I'm glad you guys actually put that in there.
Yeah, and then on top of that, like if we go and create a key now, we can actually look at all the things that you can actually do. So here, a prefix just gives you the ability to essentially add something to the beginning. So we could just write PRD, and that would be a prod. How many bytes the key actually is. The owner can be something associated with it. So we could just write James in here. and you can give the key a name it specifically. So we can say James is prod key, for example. And then in here, we can set like limited usage. We can set an expiration date. We can add our own custom metadata as we need. So maybe it's a Stripe ID or something like that. And then, of course, rate limiting however you want. But let's just add 100 uses here and create this key. Now we have a new key, and you can see that now we have PRD in the front of it, so that we know that this is a prod key. And if I copy this and I go back to Warp and I drop this in and hit enter, you'll see now that the response has changed. So now we have valid is true, so we know it's true. We now have an owner ID, so we can identify the user against your business. And then thirdly, we now have how many are remaining of that request. So when they make another request, it'll go to 98, etc., etc. And then that is also reflected in the keys itself. So if we go here, you can see the owner is James, the name is this, and we have 99 remaining. And we can go into the details again. We can see when it was last used, how many is remaining, all those details that you need essentially. And that's basically it in a nutshell. And then obviously, as you go through the docs, which I can quickly touch on, like our API is fairly easy to work with. We have a create key, which does the same thing as what you just did in the UI, but you get all the flexibility of being able to run this obviously in your app and make it all automated. You can verify the key, which you've seen. You can update a key. So essentially, you can pass in the key with your Unkey token, and then anything that you want to update. So maybe you want to update the owner ID, you can send that a log and we'll update it on the key and reflect that update. And then, of course, the big important thing is that you want to revoke a key because maybe they're abusing your API. Quick commands or from the UI, and that user will no longer be able to access the resources that are available to them. And I think that's basically the entire thing.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. A very nice and quick demo. If you are listening or watching and you are definitely interested in checking out Unkey, the website is Unkey.com as well. Also redirects now.
Does that still redirect? I don't know. Hold on. Let's see. No, it no longer does. Okay, so there's a story behind that.
So .dev. Yeah, let's touch on that before we close, because I was surprised. You guys registered with Unkey.dev, which is the website. And then one day I was like, let me check out who's Unkey.com. And then it redirected to Unkey.dev. And now it's not redirecting again?
Yeah, so we had a community member at one point reach out and say like, hey, by the way, I've like leased the Unkey.com website. And if you guys want it, like, just let us know. And we were like, oh, we don't have any money. That's the reason we didn't buy it, because I think it's like $6,000 or something in the beginning. And like, we just didn't, like, we were everything we're still paying for ourselves, right? So like every piece of everything is paid by us. So we were like, we don't have the money right now to like give you, like you could transfer it to us, but we just don't have the cash to like lease it out. So I imagine like after the first month, they were like, cool, I'll just let it expire. But that was how it was redirecting for a while, was the user had just leased it for us because they were concerned that like if we got popular, that it would be really expensive. Yeah,
that's definitely fair. Pretty cool community member, I have to say. But yeah, if you are listening or watching, head over to Unkey.dev. I'll put it again on the screen there. Check them out. I think that it solves a lot of major challenges, and I'm going to be very excited to meet with James again in a few months. We'll catch up. We'll see how the journey is going. We'll talk maybe a little bit about funding or not yet funding. I know there's stuff going on in the background. I didn't want to touch on a touchy subject or a sensitive subject or whatever it is right now. But yeah, I think that's it for now. This is episode 1. We've gone a little bit over time. We had a crash on the stream. We had babies crying in the background. We've had lots of crazy stuff happening. My side, don't worry, James. But, yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in and joining. If you want to catch any more episodes, we have quite a few already booked up over the next few weeks. Head over to cos.fyi/J. So that's cos.fyi for your information /J for journeys. And you can check out the YouTube channel where things will start to be added as they get confirmed and scheduled. But for now, James, thank you very much for being here on episode 1. I'm very
Absolutely.
excited for what you guys are doing, and I'm very excited as well to keep watching and seeing what you guys do and what you change over time and how things grow. And yeah, that's it from my side. You got any final words of wisdom, James, that you want to share?
No, just go out and create stuff. Check out Unkey, and thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. And yeah, just go out and make things, people. I think it's the best thing to do in the world. At the end of the day, like you don't know who's going to love your stuff. So just put it out there and the people will find it and they will come. But yeah, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Catch you all soon. Bye-bye.